your faith in God or die, what would you do? What would you say? Would you say, you know what? No, I'm not going to renounce my faith. Or would you say yes? What would you do in this situation? And so when we do what God's called us to do, and we are in his love, and we are in the things that he has called us to do, and we totally devote ourselves to him, we know then who he is. And who he is what we have been called to do, and that is love. God says, love one another. Love with those who love. We see that in the Bible, there have been more mentions of love than hate. There have been more mentions of doing God's will than not doing it. We see that God's love reaches into every single part of who he is. And when we are devoted, we're not just devoted. We're devoted to something that we love. And when we are devoted to something we love, we are willing to die for it. That is how devoted we are. It's like this. How many of you guys remember the movie Unstoppable? And no, not The Incredibles. The movie's called Unstoppable. It's about a train. And we see that in this movie. There's a runaway train. Because some guy does not know how to do his job. And I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Just saying, just putting that out there. But we see that in this movie, the runaway train is barreling down. And it's going so fast, and no one seems to really know what to do. And they try all these different things to stop it. And we see these two guys, the conductor and the engineer. We see that in this movie. We see that in this movie at some point in the movie, this guy looks out his mirror and he sees that there is a chance to stop this runaway train. Now, for most people, that doesn't make any sense because you're thinking, what's he going on about? I don't even know what he's talking about. I've never seen this movie. If you haven't seen this movie, you don't know what I'm talking about. If you have seen this movie and you do know what I'm talking about, good. But if you haven't seen this movie, go see it because it's an awesome movie. And we see that in this movie. These two people were so devoted to their job, so devoted to saving lives, so devoted to saying, you know what, I can be bigger than what the world has put me out to be. Because we see that in this movie. We have on one side a young person just trying to make a living, just trying something new. And people are getting on him because they think that he's better somehow than all the rest because he got the job. And so he's trying to prove himself. And we see that on the other end. We see that someone who's been there a long time, is not getting the recognition that he probably deserves. But we see that these two are so devoted to their job that they decide to go after this train. And long story short, or long movie short, they stop the train. But what I really want you guys to take out is that these two were so devoted that they would risk their lives to stop this train. They would risk their lives to stop this train. And that's often like our life. When we are devoted to something, we have to go after it with everything that we have. So it might be that you're devoted to being a game designer. Man, that's awesome. Keep going. Do that. Strive for that. Be that game designer. Maybe you want to be a fashion designer. Strive for that. Maybe you want to become a pastor or whatever it might be in your life. Strive for that. Be devoted, just like the apostles were devoted. They devoted themselves to God, even if it meant death. Even if it meant that people would ridicule them. People would look on them strangely. They devoted themselves. So when we devote ourselves in love, it's not just who we are. It's not just something that we say. It's not just things that the world has said is good, but it's an extension of who we are in Christ. Because we devoted ourselves to loving unconditionally. Loving when there is no other way to live. Loving when it doesn't really make sense. So often, we look at our life and we think, man, how can I keep going? How can I do the things that I'm called to do? And God says, keep going. God says, be devoted. Be devoted. When we look at the word devoted, we see that God, in His glory, in His almightiness, says, this is my love. I want to ask you guys today, how many of you guys have ever been in a situation where there is nothing else you can do but love? When there has been a situation where your love doesn't really seem to make sense. Whether it's a love for God or love for a person, and you think that this love is just way out there, and you think this love is just bonkers, really. How many of us have been there? Because I want to tell you guys, I've been there. When there is nothing else you can do but love. Even love when it doesn't make sense. But God calls us to love and love unconditionally. Love even if it hurts. Because that's what Christ did for us. He loved us even though it hurts. He loved us through every mean thing that we ever said to Him. Oh, well, Jesus, if you're the Son of God, break yourself free from these chains. And if you can't, then you're just a big, huge chicken. If you're the Son of God, then raise up your hand, mighty smiter, and smite us down with your might. And the list goes on and on. But He endured. So I'm here today to tell you guys that no matter what you are devoted to, you can endure. If you're devoted to your job, keep going. If you're devoted to becoming something better than you are, keep going. Because we see that love. It's not just something that we say. But it's an extension of who we are in Christ. And what love truly means to us. My definition of love is putting others before yourself. Being the first one there and the last to leave. Loving when it doesn't make sense. Loving when there is no other way to love. But being devoted. So I want to ask you guys, are you devoted? Are you devoted to do the things that God's called you to do? Are you devoted to seeing an outcome? Because when we love with those who love, and we mourn with those who mourn, and we rejoice with those who rejoice, we have become one. One spirit, one mind, one body, one church. The church's mission is to love. Not just love when it makes sense. Because really, there's never really an opportune time to love when it makes sense in the church. But God says, love with those who love. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to love with those who love. God says, rejoice with those who rejoice. So we're going to rejoice with those who rejoice. God says, mourn with those who mourn. So mourn with those who mourn. And devote your time, your talents, to knowing who I am. Devote your time to your studies. So that when someone comes up to you with a question, when someone comes up to you asking, why are you so devoted, you have an answer. You're not just sitting there like, oh, why am I so devoted? Well, let me see. Well, I was devoted at a young age. Let's see. I was devoted in college. That didn't really work out. But we can give an answer why we are devoted. And so we see that there have been so many people who devoted their life to God, being the 12 apostles or disciples. We see that Moses devoted himself to being an outcast, being a speaker, going up to Pharaoh every single day, devoting himself to setting his people free. We see that Noah devoted himself to building the ark, even when it didn't make sense, even when everyone else was telling him to stop. There's no rain. What are you, stupid? Psh. Yeah, like you're gonna build this thing. For years, it would seem. And there's gonna be rain. Yeah, that's gonna happen. But we see that even in this, he devoted himself to keep going. We see that Daniel devoted himself to teaching these 120 other guys how to fight, military strategies, how to win over an enemy, and most importantly, how to worship. And when there was no other way to worship, he kept going. He devoted himself to that. We see David devoting himself to standing up for the little guy. Standing up even when it doesn't make sense. Standing up when everyone else is sitting down. Standing up to the person. Standing up to a bully. He devoted himself to that. And he became a great king. I want to ask you this question now. What things are you devoted to? What things do you devote your life, your time, your talent to? Because there are so many things in this world we can devote our time, our treasures, our talents to. But if we do not move, if we do not do the things that God has called us to do, we can never devote ourselves truly. We see that there have been so many people who devoted their lives in different ways. Different ways to love. Different ways to pray. Different ways to worship. So I'm asking you today, where is your worship? What things are you worshiping? What things right now are you truly devoted to? Because when we are with God, we are truly devoted. Don't just be devoted sometimes. Don't just be devoted when it suits you. But be devoted all the time. And so as I start to end this message series, I want to leave you guys with this. Love with those who love. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Because in each way is significant. When we love, we have joy. When we rejoice, we have gladness. And when we mourn, we have sadness. But these are all key ingredients to building who we are in Christ. Being totally devoted followers of Christ. Not just being devoted when it suits us, but being totally devoted followers of Christ. just like the 12 apostles.